Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Finding Genius video series. I'm here joined with a good friend and recent partner of Canaan, Laura. Good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Canaan is a pretty historic fund. They've invested in companies like Instacart, Row, The Real Real, and Laura also actually wrote a chapter on social networks for the book Finding Genius. So it's great to have you here. Just to kick off the conversation, I know folks picked up different hobbies during the pandemic, but in the pre-recording, you were talking about how you actually painted that beautiful painting behind you. Can you talk about a little bit about that hobby that you've been developing?
Yeah, I think the first hobby before painting that I picked up was probably scrolling through TikTok during COVID. And this was actually inspired by an artist on TikTok. Her name's Caroline Mara, who paints with a mop and sees really beautiful paintings. And so I had a little bit of extra space and a little bit of extra time. And so tried to put my hand to it. Inspiration goes to her, though.
Is that the first attempt?
This was the first attempt. Canvases are more expensive than you think, especially when they're that big. And so I was like, I have to get this right. And so I put down drop cloths. I got a mop from Dwayne Reed and then a bunch of paint and a bucket and then just went for it.
Wow. Are you gonna sell that as an NFT?
It's a good question.
It's very current.
I need to sell something as an NFT.
That's awesome. Well, so actually, one of the a lesser known fact, I mean, beyond the fact that you're an artist also, is that you actually used to work with Marie Kondo and kind of helped build out that media brand. Can you talk a bit more about that and scaling a consumer enterprise off of a person and their interests?
That was one of the most fun experiences, and it really came from sort of a passion of mine. You can probably see my apartment a little bit here. Before I read her book and before I worked with her, I was a pack rat, might be the nicer way of saying it. I just had way too much stuff. I read her book and felt like it really kind of changed my life, as cheesy as that sounds. And that's probably why her book has that title, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. So I basically found a way to get in touch with her and told her, hey, I'll do whatever you want. I'll carry your bag. I'll help you clean. I just want to kind of be around you and soak up whatever your magic is. And it ended up being kind of this fortuitous connection because she had had a lot of success with her books, but she was at this inflection point where she was starting to think, how do I really capitalize on the brand I've built, not only to further the message that she was sharing, but also to really build a business. So I moved to Tokyo and worked with her for a little bit, and she was at the point where they were starting to work on the Netflix deal for that first season. And if you haven't seen the show, you should. And that was really kind of this point where we knew we're about to have this really incredible media moment and kind of acquisition channel potentially. What else can we do with the brand? And naturally, we started to think about building a lifestyle brand and really a product business or e-commerce business. So first, I think the trickiest thing about that with her is that many see her as minimalist or kind of helping you get rid of things, not necessarily helping you buy more things. So we had to thread the needle of how do you actually build a product business while still staying true to that mission. And so she still has this focus around things that spark joy. And so we tried to focus on things that are still really high quality and still really meaningful and can serve a purpose in your daily life. And so I helped her with her very first product collaboration with one of Canaan's portfolio companies, Kuyana. And they did a Kuyana by Marie Kondo jewelry box. So kind of inspired by bento boxes and fit inside a larger jewelry case. And it sold out, I think, within minutes, and it was kind of the first demonstration that she had real brand power and pricing power. And then from there, the team kind of continued on in figuring out what that looks like, and it's evolved a lot over time. But it was a really cool experience getting to see that, and I also think it's a very different type of business when it's focused around an individual's personality and brand rather than kind of the brand being a thing in and of itself.
Right. We've actually seen that more where individual personalities are becoming more important and they're building a brand around. Esther Perel is now a podcast, and Marie Kondo. How do you think about that of someone that's trying to do that now and turn themselves into more of a brand? And you're seeing people do that in the crypto space, you're seeing people do it in healthcare, and then Substack, and everybody moving that direction. What did you learn with working with Marie Kondo or other people in the space that maybe other people can learn from?
I think first and foremost, it's that the creator has to be someone who wants to actually build that brand and build a business. Like, it's very different building a following than it is to build some sort of other type of lasting business, although they are converging, and I think we're starting to see tools and platforms that enable that. But there's different ways of doing it, where you see these personalities where they're just kind of attaching their name to it and saying, hey, use my face, use my name, I'll help support it or help market it, but there's other people really running it in the background. With Marie, it was, she was the face, but she was really involved because she cared so much. And I think both can work, but in her case, her being so involved, I think, kept it really focused on a very specific message and core. And you could argue it maybe limits a bit in terms of who she touches and how big it gets, but I think it's an important consideration for anyone, whether you're an investor or a founder, to know kind of what your limits are and where you want to focus.
Right. Was that your first, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Was that your first introduction to Canaan through Guyana?
No, so I had actually joined Canaan in 2014. The introduction came via one of their portfolio companies, Kabam, which was incubated at Canaan. And I spent time as intern number one in 2008 when they were still building communities on Facebook. This was before it was even called Kabam, it was called Water Cooler. And I had kept in touch with that team, and Kevin, the CEO, introduced me to Canaan in 2014, and that's how I started there.
Okay, and then now you've been there 7 years. You were just recently made partner at Canaan, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What have you seen evolve in the ecosystem and change through venture? And I know that shift, you've changed focus a bit, but the theme throughout most of that has been investing in consumer businesses. So it'd just be interesting to hear about how your venture career has evolved and some of the areas that you found interesting through that time.
Yeah, I actually, when I started, I was much more of a generalist and spent a lot of time looking at infrastructure, cybersecurity, and enterprise SaaS in the early days. Honestly, it was really just learning about everything and kind of helping to refine, or working to refine, my lens and kind of calibrate what I was looking for in founders in particular. I'd say I've been fortunate because I've gotten to see so many aspects of investing. When I started, I was early in my career at Canaan, and so it was much more about learning to do the work, right? How do I really effectively diligence a company? How do I really understand the ins and outs of how the business model works or what the market looks like? And also build the right networks, not only of entrepreneurs and VCs, but of other operators who will be talent for companies, who can be diligence resources. And now, I still do all of those things, but I'd say more of my time gets spent working with the portfolio companies I invest in and where I sit on the board. And that's where I have the most fun. You get such a great seat and opportunity and view into how these companies are progressing. And when you invest at the early stage, like Canaan does, you can have real influence, whether it's helping to team build or helping to think about strategy, helping in making connections and bring resources that can be really meaningful for a company that has 5 people, right?
Right.
And so that's been probably the biggest change in my career at Canaan and the most meaningful one to me.
And then with some of the companies that you've invested in, I guess going a bit deeper, and some of them have been consumer focused, and then some of them have been commerce focused. So Ollie, Nate, Coterie, Mira, those companies are shifting the overall commerce brand, building a brand around that. They're focused on different areas of commerce and going direct to consumer. Could you talk about, you just said that you were building that understanding, that framework as a principal and now as a partner of how to diligence these types of companies. Are there certain things that stand out when you are looking at companies like that, or what you're adding as a strategist at the board level as well?
Yeah, within commerce in particular, I'd say we've seen different waves, and that's true of any category, whether it's consumer, enterprise, et cetera. And so some of the companies that you named, like Ollie, which is a true D2C brand consumer subscription for dog food, that's a company where when we invested, it was kind of at the height of D2C brands, and it's one that's done really, really well. But at the time when they started, acquisition channels were easier or less saturated, and it was much easier for companies to grow. We probably do a little bit less investing in direct-to-consumer brands today, just because it's harder for businesses to get to that same scale of an Ollie or others that have come before it. So I think in terms of a framework or things we're looking for, it changes, right? But I'd say one of the things that we've been really, really focused on is what advantages does that company have when it comes to consumer acquisition? Paid acquisition just isn't going to be it. There's another company in our portfolio that's been really focused on building community and kind of fandoms, and they essentially have zero customer acquisition cost because they are not constricted to a single platform like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. They have their own app that's dedicated. It's a company called MSCHF based in New York, and they've just been really thoughtful about how they approach acquisition, right? And it's really organic, it's really viral, and that's something that is sort of the secret sauce. Right. So that's one type of thing we look for. I'd say another thing we're following as a broad trend is what's the infrastructure that's required for all of these D2C brands that have come up over the last 5 years on Shopify or others, and how are consumers looking to transact, right? It's not just that they're going onto a website and they're putting in their information and having something sent. They're looking on Instagram and TikTok and they want to check out immediately where they are, or they want live stream shopping, right? And they want it to be a social activity. That's great, and those are great consumer behaviors, but then what do you actually need underneath to make sure that while you're live stream shopping, you can sell something from Shopify, you can sell something from a brand that's on Magento or BigCommerce or WooCommerce. There's so many different tools out there, but you need something to actually string them all together. Or how do you deal with shipping or any of these other things? And so that's actually where I see a lot of opportunity given this D2C boom we've had.
And then whether it's with MSCHF or it's other companies that you've seen do it well, as other founders are thinking about community building and they can't go the paid acquisition route, and they are trying to tap into that virality or create something that consumers would actually care about beyond TikTok and Instagram, what have you seen work well that MSCHF has done, or another company that is it replicable, or is it just based off of what they themselves are doing? But when they bring in the CMO, is there a certain playbook that those types of people are following?
I think we're in the really early innings of it, and so I don't think there is a true playbook. I'd say the most generalized way of putting it, and what I've seen, is the companies that have seemed to rise above the fray, especially with Gen Z lately, are ones that have kind of built cults around what they're doing, or fandoms. I wrote a piece where I talked about cults, and inclusive cults rather than exclusive clubs. Yeah. And I think this cult mindset is one that actually really works, where you're so bought into the brand, you'll follow anything they do. You don't need ads, you just need kind of the dogma that they're putting out, or the mission or the ethos to buy into it. And then as a cult member, you're willing to buy whatever they put out, or you're willing to read whatever they're stating out in the world. And you as the cult member actually become that evangelist for them, right? Like, you want to talk about it because as a member of that cult, you want to tell everybody about, whether it's your Gen Z influencer and you love Charlie D'Amelio and you're, sending all your friends her stuff, or if, you're a fan of a right? Yeah, exactly, right? I'm talking about her now. Yeah. So I think that's the closest I could say in terms of a playbook, and it's not a tactical one. It's more of a kind of concept.
No, it's interesting. In that piece, I'll have to read it, but did you touch on how you maintain that attention as this cult? Because when there's so many other areas and things that are vying for consumer attention, how is a company like MSCHF or other ones done it in a way where they remain relevant? Because we've seen these waves, and this might also go into social media, because I know that chapter that you wrote for Finding Genius was on social media, and we're now seeing a wave of Clubhouse becoming the most exciting thing during the pandemic, and they'll have to continue to figure out how to maintain that excitement going forward. But these communities online, how do they maintain that sort of engagement over time that you've seen?
Again, I don't think there's a real playbook for it yet. I do think part of what it comes down to is, if as a cult leader you've created kind of the ethos and the mission, or the kind of framework for your cult, as long as you continue to put out content that's kind of within those bounds, if people have already bought into, I'm a member of this cult, I believe in it, they're going to want to engage with whatever you put out, right? And so for a company like MSCHF, it might be drops, like product drops or other things. For a Clubhouse cult, which you could have, maybe it's just your weekly show where you're bringing on relevant people, and everyone who's in that Clubhouse cult has bought into whatever topic it is that you're talking about, and so they're going to want to listen, they're going to want to engage. And I think some of these quote unquote cults might end up being a little bit more niche, but anyone who kind of buys into that idea can join, and you're by default, because you've kind of stated what you stand for and what people believe in within this group, it's like you're already pre-vetting for future engagement and retention.
Right. That's a really interesting theme, because I remember when we met, it might have been 3 or 4 years ago, you were thinking and figuring out, you were saying Facebook had operated as this cult on social media, and now that was being unbundled, and there was new places folks were looking for these communities online. That's also evolved into your shift into commerce and some of these new businesses that you've been investing in. Where do you think, maybe this is the third wave that you're now looking at, but where do you think these things are going? You sort of hinted at it with Shopify and some of those companies that are doing social shopping, but are there other areas that now pique your interest based off of all this?
They're all becoming so interrelated, to be honest, in my mind. People talk about the metaverse all the time, right? But I think there's this natural conversion of social or gaming, entertainment broadly, and then also an economy within those, right? Like, at the core, a lot of it comes down to where you want to give your attention to, and then how you want to spend either your attention or your money or whatever else it is within those ecosystems. And so I think the idea of a metaverse where you go and you spend time, whether it's watching a concert or playing a game or just hanging out with friends in some sort of world, is one that is really compelling and really interesting. You can then imagine how you layer in some sort of payment economy or infrastructure, and that could be on the blockchain, it could be all sorts of different ways. You can see brands entering that, right? Like, you could try on clothes within the metaverse. You could, maintain all of your subscriptions within there, right? And kind of interact. You could look at all your NFTs that you've bought, right? I think they're all converging, and that's what I think is really interesting. There's clearly going to be a lot of infrastructure underlying that. There's also going to be a lot of consumer experiences within there, whether it's focused on individual cults and ideas and things that you like to engage in within that. It could be singular games that you play. It's massive. It's really just a reflection of kind of our everyday world, and I think people have gotten much more used to and comfortable with that idea, especially with COVID, where we've kind of been forced into this digital experience.
Yeah, I think you had written a piece also about the cocooning.
Spiritual cocooning, yeah.
Spiritual cocooning, right. And that was, you're saying, as a result of COVID as well.
Yeah, and cocooning is a term that I did not come up with. I think it started in the 80s, but it was kind of this inward look, but kind of more of a movement towards being at home. And that's when, Nintendo came out, and, people were creating these rec rooms or these, ways to stay at home and engage. And we certainly were kind of forced into that with COVID. I was looking at it also from the perspective of, what are the services that we're bringing home? How are we taking care of ourselves, whether from a mental health perspective or from a wellness perspective or other things within the home rather than going out or going into community for them. It naturally extends to digital platforms that can enable that. And I think, again, community can still exist and interaction can still exist even when you're at home and you're by yourself.
Right. So I know we're almost out of time, but I guess two last questions that are less venture and more just general life. Marie Kondo, you were saying that there's some lessons that you took away that sort of improved your life. What are some of the big, watch the Netflix documentary, beyond that, just by working with her, of things that you've learned or done with her that have also helped that other people can incorporate into their daily lives?
I'll tell you kind of one small thing and then maybe a broader theme. There's a couple lessons that she has that were just these unlocks for me and helping to let go of things. One is for gifts. And one thing she always talks about is when someone gives you a gift, the whole purpose of that gift was for them to be able to give it to you and for you to accept it. And then once you do that, you can do whatever you want with the gift. You can throw it away, you can give it to someone else, you can donate it. And it was so freeing because I had so many things where I was like, I have to keep this, it's a gift, but I'm never gonna use it, I'm never gonna wear it. And I think it helped me appreciate the things that I had and also just kind of the interactions I was having with people in the gifting process. I'd say the broader lesson, and I know it sounds so corny because it's like a meme at this point, but this whole idea around spark joy, right? Like she talks about it with items in particular, but it's hold an item, see if it sparks joy for you. If it does, keep it. If it doesn't, get rid of it. There is an essence to that I think is really helpful within investing, within operating a company, etc. It's kind of this question of, is it essential? Trust your gut around it, right? And then clear out a lot of the things that aren't essential or don't bring you joy because they're probably taking away from your ability to focus or to enjoy the things that you have or really prioritize the things that are important.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. And then the last question is, you went to Stanford undergrad, right? And you went to GSB as well.
I did.
So there's probably a ton of Stanford alum or people that are applying that look up to you in your career and say, okay, we want to also be a partner at a top tier fund. And they're writing their essays for business school now. And that common essay question, which has now become sort of popular culture, is what matters most to you and why. So how did you answer that? I think that would just be an interesting one for people to hear.
So mine was very personal. And what it boiled down to essentially was what mattered most to me was checking my biases and understanding them and being able to change and evolve as a result of that. And I referenced this Radiolab podcast, I think it was called Colors, from years ago. And there was this one thing that really stuck with me where if you look back through history, there's enough evidence to show you that the human eye basically had a way in which it started to understand and recognize different colors. Anything that started with black, white, red, and then eventually in every culture, and you can look at historical texts, the last color to show up is blue. And there is this unlock in my brain where it kind of pointed to the fact that blue always existed, but people couldn't name it until they had a word for it, or they just assumed that it didn't exist or it was something else. And then once people shined a light on it, it really changed your perspective. And I wrote about kind of a personal story and learning new information about someone in my family later on in my life, and it just completely changed the way that I viewed our relationship and viewed them. And it was such a powerful moment for me, and it's something that I really strive to make sure I am constantly checking in and constantly reevaluating things, because there's so much that you don't know. And it's true in venture, it's true with the founders that we back, but on a personal level too, I think it's just a fundamental thing that's
more
important to me.
now. That's really interesting. And I guess the last thing is if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that? How do they follow all the things that you're learning about and thinking about?
I'm on LinkedIn, Laura Chau, Chau, on Twitter at Laura Chau. And then also I publish stuff on Medium here and there, so you can find me there.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.